They say some deaths are accidents, others are curses, but the line between them is thinner than you think. In the year 1874, in a quiet farming town carved deep into the hills of Pennsylvania, 5 brothers sat down to supper in their family's mill house. The Miller brothers, Elias, Jonah, Matthew, Thomas, and Samuel, were known throughout the county as hard workers, men of discipline, sons of a father whose shadow still lingered long after his death. And yet, when the sun rose the next morning, all 5 were found lifeless. No blood, no wounds, no sign of struggle. 5 coffins lowered into the earth, 5 widows dressed in black, 5 families shattered in a single night. Coincidence, the papers said. A strange illness, perhaps. But behind closed doors, in hushed whispers, neighbors asked a question too dangerous to say aloud. Had the Millers been cursed? And before I go deeper, before I unravel the story you're never meant to hear, I need something from you. If you have the courage to stay with me on this path, then like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Because once you hear what happened to the Miller brothers, you will never look at family or fate or faith the same way again. The official records were thin, but the rumors were heavy. They spoke of a family feud stretching back generations, of unpaid debts, of land that had once belonged to another clan. Some swore the brothers had opened something they should never have touched, something left hidden beneath the old stone mill. Others whispered that the land itself had rejected them, that the soil was consecrated long before their father bought it. Whatever the truth, 5 brothers died in the same house, in the same night, under the same roof that their children swore still echoed with their voices long after the bodies were buried. And if you think this is just another tale of superstition, hold your judgment. Because the further you descend into the Miller family's history, the more you will see that every strange detail, every broken record, every silenced testimony forms a chain. And chains are never coincidences. The Miller brothers were not simple men. They were heirs to a legacy of silence. Their father, Joseph Miller, had built the mill with his bare hands in the early 1800s. The story told in town was one of triumph, an immigrant who carved prosperity out of wilderness. But the story told inside the family was different. Joseph had not built on empty land. He had claimed ground already soaked with old grief. The stones of the mill were not fresh cut, but salvaged from ruins no one remembered clearly. And the spring that powered their wheel was said to run red, with rust long before the first blade touched it. Neighbors spoke of strange lights in the mill's windows late at night, long after the wheel had stopped turning. They said Joseph would lock his sons inside with him for hours, that the sound of voices carried through the stone as if more than just a father and his boys were inside. Elias, the eldest, never married until late in life, and when pressed, he only said that his father had required obedience first and happiness second. By the time Joseph Miller died, his sons had grown into men bound more by duty than by choice. They ran the mill, they worked the fields, and though their neighbors saw them as strong, there was always something in their eyes, a weariness too deep for men their age. Some said they feared disappointing their father, even in death. Others said they feared something older, something that had lived in the mill long before Joseph's hands laid stone upon stone. So when the 5 brothers sat together for supper that final night, they carried not only their father's legacy, but generations of weight unseen. The bread was broken, the cider poured, the candles lit. Witnesses who saw them earlier swore nothing was unusual. But as the hours passed, the mill wheel creaked though no water flowed, and the neighbors heard the low rumble of voices again, just as they had when Joseph lived. By dawn, the brothers lay dead. Coincidence is the word the living cling to when they cannot bear to believe in patterns. But curses, They thrive in silence and repetition, in the same story happening again and again until denial collapses. And the Miller brothers had always been trapped in repetition. The morning after the deaths, the townsfolk gathered in silence. The coroner's report was vague. Cause unknown. The doctor muttered about possible poisoning, though no toxins were ever found. Others suggested heart failure, as if 5 strong men all shared the same weakness on the same night. Yet none of their faces bore the grimace of pain. Their eyes were closed as though asleep. Their hands rested neatly on the table, as though waiting for something more to be served. The widows protested, demanding answers, but answers were dangerous. Questions even more so. Within days, the deaths were declared a family tragedy, not a crime, not a mystery, just a sorrowful act of fate. But the town knew better. The silence was too heavy. Farmers whispered that the Miller land should be abandoned, that the soil itself was cursed. Some refused to grind their wheat at the mill again. Yet the widows kept it running, driven by necessity, until one by one, they too moved away. Still, the rumors grew. Children dared each other to peek through the broken shutters, swearing they saw shadows moving inside, even when the place was empty. Old men told stories of voices at the wheel, calling out names no one remembered. And the question lingered. If it was truly coincidence, why did the Miller family vanish from history so quickly, as if erased? Why did no descendant remain to speak their name with pride? You see, coincidences fade, but curses linger. And the Miller brothers' story never truly died. It traveled in hushed voices, from farmhouse to tavern to church pew, until it became less a memory and more a warning. And that warning has reached you now, across the years. You may believe it was accident, or you may believe it was curse. But once you've heard it, the doubt never leaves. The town buried the brothers in a single row, 5 graves side by side, as though keeping them together might restrain whatever force had taken them. Yet even in death, they did not rest. The soil at their graves sank faster than the earth around it, as if pulled downward. Families reported dreams in which the brothers stood at the foot of their beds, not angry, not sorrowful, simply waiting. And when the church bell tolled each Sunday, some swore they heard an extra echo, 5 hollow notes that never came from the tower. The preacher urged the town to pray, insisting that the deaths were the will of God. But not all were convinced. Some whispered that the brothers had not died naturally, that their father had bound them to an oath too heavy to escape. Old records hinted at debts unpaid, rituals unfinished. The mill had been profitable, but not by ordinary means. Too often, the wheat never seemed to match the abundance of the flour produced. Too often, those who quarreled with Joseph Miller suffered misfortune within weeks. One widow, Sarah, swore in private that on the night of their deaths, her husband had spoken of a reckoning. She said Elias, the eldest, had warned the others that something would claim them before dawn, and that it was not sickness, not accident, but a bargain coming due. When asked what bargain, she fell silent and never spoke of it again. Coincidence cannot explain a bargain. Coincidence does not linger in the soil, or in dreams, or in the hollow ring of bells. What happened to the Millers carried the shape of something older, something that fed not on flesh, but on promises made in silence. Generations later, when the mill had collapsed into ruin, travelers passing through the valley still reported strange sensations. Horses balked at the bridge leading toward the property. Birds never nested in the trees that grew closest to the wheel. And when storms rolled through, lightning struck the same spot again and again. The broken chimney, the one remnant of the house where the brothers had drawn their last breath. Local children dared each other to spend the night among the ruins. Few made it past midnight. Those who did swore they heard voices whispering beneath the turning of an invisible wheel. Not loud, not violent, just steady as though reciting names. Always 5 names, always in the same order. Elias, Jonah, Matthew, Thomas, Samuel. And if the children stayed longer, they claimed the whispers began to add new names. Names of the living, names of the daring, names of the ones listening. The mill was eventually demolished, its stones carted away to build barns and fences. But the curse, if curse it was, did not scatter with the rubble. Families who built with miller's stone reported sickness, accidents, fires. Neighbors swore the pattern returned. 5 deaths at a time, 5 misfortunes in sequence, as though the chain had not broken but spread. And when confronted, they all repeated the same uneasy phrase. It's only coincidence. But coincidences do not chant names in the dark. Coincidences do not return every generation, marking 5 at a time. Coincidences do not leave widows whispering of bargains unspoken. If you're listening carefully, you can already feel it, the shape of a curse disguised as chance. The deeper one looks into the Miller family's history, the more tangled the silence becomes. The county clerk's records show gaps where there should be deeds. Letters between the brothers vanish mid-sentence, whole pages ripped out. The church logs list confessions but never specify the sins. It is as though someone or something scrubbed the truth clean, leaving only fragments sharp enough to wound but never whole enough to explain. Yet fragments tell their own story. Joseph Miller's name appears once in an old ledger beside a strange notation, 5 for 1. No explanation, no context, just those 3 words repeated in another hand on the last page of the book. 5 for 1. What did it mean? 5 debts for 1 favor, 5 sons for 1 father's prosperity, or 5 lives for 1 night's peace? Those who believe in curses see patterns everywhere. But patterns have power because they repeat, because they echo until disbelief is exhausted. And here, the echo is undeniable. 5 brothers bound to 1 fate. 5 graves collapsing together. 5 names whispered in the dark. 5 storms striking the same chimney. 5 stones carried into barns that burned. Coincidence or curse? The question remains the same, but the evidence leans heavier each time. And as you hear these patterns now, as you follow the chain of silence and repetition, ask yourself, are you merely learning history, or are you becoming part of its rhythm? Because curses do not stay locked in the past. They feed on memory, on retelling, on attention. And the more you listen, the closer you are to carrying the weight the Miller brothers could not escape. The widows of the Miller brothers never spoke freely of that night again, but fragments slipped through their silence. A child recalled his mother waking from sleep, pale as chalk, whispering they were called, and they obeyed. Another neighbor swore Sarah Miller, Elias's widow, told him the men had been restless all week, gathering late at the mill after dusk, speaking in tones too hushed for human ears. She said when they came home, their hands smelled of iron, as though they had been working in blood, though no animal had been slaughtered. But the strangest fragment comes from a sermon delivered months later by the town's preacher. He warned his flock against the arrogance of bargaining with shadows, a phrase that made little sense to most, but one that seemed to shake the widows who sat in the pew. Some claimed they lowered their eyes, as if guilty, as if complicit, and when pressed after service, not one of them denied it outright. What bargain could 5 brothers have made? Was it wealth, protection, survival, or something darker? A pact sealed in the wheelhouse of their mill, where stone met water, where silence held its own weight. Whatever bargain it was, their deaths seemed less like punishment and more like collection. And if debts can be collected once, who is to say they cannot be collected again? Coincidence bends under the weight of ritual. And by now, the Miller story does not feel like chance. It feels like a pattern deliberately etched into history, repeated until we are forced to admit its shape. Years after the brothers' deaths, a traveling physician passed through the valley. He carried notebooks, sharp eyes, and the kind of skepticism that thrives on dismissing old tales. He visited the site of the mill, spoke with aging neighbors, and listened to their accounts. At first, he scoffed, blaming hysteria, mold in the grain, carbon monoxide from poorly vented fires. He dismissed the whispers of bargains and curses as the babble of frightened peasants. But his skepticism faltered when he visited the graves. He noted in his journal that the soil above the brothers' coffins seemed unnaturally cold to the touch, colder than the winter air itself. He wrote that when he lingered too long, he heard the faint hum of grinding wheels beneath the ground, though no mill had turned in years. Most chilling of all, he wrote that on his last night in the town, he dreamed of 5 men standing at his bedside. They did not speak, but one by one, they laid their hands upon his chest until he woke, gasping for air. The physician fled the next morning, leaving behind only his unfinished notes. His final entry read, "If this is coincidence, it is one that watches. If this is curse, it is one that waits." And so, the curse or coincidence grew stronger not by proof, but by those who doubted it and still felt its weight. For even doubt can feed what lingers in silence. By the turn of the century, the Miller family name had nearly vanished from the county. No grandchildren bore it, no farms kept it, no church stones honored it. It was as if history itself had erased them. But erasure is never total. Stories linger in whispers, in half-remembered warnings. Children were told never to play near old mills, never to drink from springs that ran red, never to gather in fives when night was falling. The warnings spread beyond the valley, until no one remembered their source. This is how curses live on, not as facts and ledgers, but as habits, as prohibitions pass from parent to child. They hide inside the ordinary until the ordinary becomes ritual. And ritual, repeated without understanding, is the perfect hiding place for ancient debts. Even now, if you think back, you may recall an elder warning you against gathering in certain numbers or refusing to let you walk alone by water after dark. These prohibitions may have been explained as safety, as superstition, as nonsense. But what if they were fragments of the Miller curse, carried unknowingly through generations, disguised as common sense? Coincidence does not survive centuries. Coincidence does not bury itself in warnings and lullabies. Only something older, something bound by repetition, can survive that long. And if you're hearing this story now, if you're tracing the Miller brothers' fate, you may already be part of the very repetition that sustains it. In every town, there are places where memory is heavier than stone. For the Miller family, that place was not just the graves, nor the ruins of the mill, but the silence of those who lived after them. A silence that carried a strange weight, as if speaking their names aloud might call them back. Silence is a language, and in this town it spoke louder than sermons. The widows remarried, but each marriage ended in misfortune. One husband drowned mysteriously in the very spring that had powered the mill, his body unmarked, his lungs filled not with water, but with ash. Another took ill after only 5 weeks, his skin breaking into lesions no doctor could identify. A third disappeared entirely, his boots found by the riverbank, but no trace of him ever recovered. The town began to murmur. The Miller curse is not finished. And still, records grew thinner. The county clerk stopped noting the widows' deaths, as if instructed to look away. The church buried them quietly, without inscription. Their children left the valley, never writing back. It was as though the bloodline itself knew it carried a stain, one that would never wash clean. Coincidence would have ended with the five brothers. Coincidence does not spread to the men who dared replace them, does not pursue widows into new vows, does not mar children with the burden of absence. Coincidence ends where memory fades. But this followed. This clung. This lingered in silence, refusing to let the Miller name dissolve into dust. There is a chilling account written decades later by a traveling priest who claimed to pass through the valley on a storm-torn night. He wrote that when he sought shelter in a barn, he was awakened by voices at midnight. 5 distinct voices, all speaking in rhythm, reciting something he could not understand. At first he thought it was the family who owned the barn, but when he rose to listen, he found the family still asleep. The voices came from the rafters above him. He described seeing shadows moving against the beams, though no lamp was lit. He counted them, 5 shapes, bending, swaying, in a rhythm like the turning of a wheel. He dropped to his knees, whispering prayers, but the voices only grew louder. And then, he wrote, one voice broke from the others and spoke in clear words, 5 for 1. 1 for 5. The priest fled at dawn, refusing to take payment for his services, and when he told the villagers what he had heard, they begged him never to write it down. He did anyway, and because he did, the story survived. But what was 5 for 1? Was it a bargain of blood for prosperity? A covenant of brothers bound in silence? Or was it something older, something whispered into their father's ear when he built the mill, binding not just himself, but every son born beneath that roof? Coincidence does not chant. Coincidence does not echo in rafters where no man stands. Coincidence does not leave riddles that burn in the memory for generations. What the priest heard was not chance. It was something calling, something waiting. By the early 1900s, the land where the mill once stood had been reclaimed by forest. Saplings grew where the wheel had turned. Moss covered the stones. Travelers often passed without noticing. And yet, those who lingered too long described strange disorientation. Compasses spun without reason. Time seemed to slip. A watch would lose 10 minutes in the space of one. Hunters swore the forest fell utterly silent as soon as they stepped across the broken foundation, as though even the animals refused to bear witness. One hunter told of falling asleep against a stump and waking to find 5 figures standing around him. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply stared until he fled, abandoning his rifle, never to hunt again. When pressed, he refused to describe their faces, saying only that they were too familiar. Locals avoided the land, but the story spread, and always the number returned. 5 men, 5 names, 5 for 1. It was as though the very soil had memorized the brothers, and anything that entered was forced to remember them too. Coincidence cannot explain soil that resists forgetting. Coincidence cannot bend compasses, silence forests, or repeat numbers until even skeptics hear them in their dreams. What happened to the Miller brothers may have begun as one night of death, but it became more than history. It became a pattern etched into the earth itself. And patterns, once written, do not fade. They wait. Every town tries, eventually, to bury its shame. But the Miller story refused burial. It clung to every family line that stayed in that valley. Children whispered it when the lamps were out. Mothers warned against wandering too far at dusk. Old men swore that if you spoke the names of the 5 brothers after dark, you would hear the millstones turning in the distance, though the wheel had long been destroyed. There is a deeper terror in stories that no one owns, that no family claims, yet all repeat. For that is how you know the story has slipped beyond human invention and into something older, something elemental. The Millers had become a legend, but not the kind that elevates. Theirs was a legend that chained the entire valley, a reminder that time does not always move forward. Sometimes it circles back, endlessly, to the same night. And then came the rumors that the curse was not contained. Travelers passing through carried it with them. A salesman on his way to Richmond vanished along the same road where the brothers once walked. His car was found, horses still tethered, goods untouched. But he was gone. No blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. Coincidence does not replicate absence across generations. Coincidence does not select its victims along the same roads, at the same hours, in the same way. Coincidence can be charted. This defied charting. The Miller brothers had not simply died. They had established a pattern, a contagion of disappearance and dread. And the world, unknowingly, was catching it. In the archives of an old Masonic lodge, hidden in a forgotten Virginia town, a ledger was discovered in the 1940s. It listed names, dates, and symbols scrawled in the margins. The year 1821 appeared beside 5 identical markings, a wheel bisected by a blade. Next to it, the surname Miller. But the strangest part was not their name. It was the final note, written in Latin. Non exitu, sed reditu. Not an ending, but in return. Why would a fraternal order, sworn to secrecy, keep the Millers' names etched beside such a phrase? Were they members or sacrifices? Did their deaths mark an initiation, a sealing of blood for some higher covenant? The lodge later burned to the ground under suspicious circumstances. The ledger barely survived, rescued by a collector who later refused to display it, claiming he heard voices when he turned its pages. The wheel's symbol repeated itself in his sketches, scribbled unconsciously on letters and bills until his own hand no longer felt like his own. Coincidence does not write in forgotten tongues. Coincidence does not repeat wheels across centuries. Coincidence does not force itself into the hands of secret orders sworn to silence. What the Millers had become was not a story, not a curse, but a mark carved into the invisible order beneath history itself. And yet, even marks fade unless they are refreshed. In 1967, 5 young men camping in the forest near the old mill site vanished overnight. Their tents remained. Their fires still smoldered. Their footprints ended at the edge of the foundation. No bodies were ever found. Their families begged for answers, but the official reports blurred into silence. 5 again. Always 5. The number returned like an accusation. Police suggested they wandered, perhaps fell into a ravine, but no ravine was ever located. Search dogs refused to enter the ruins. Helicopters scanned every inch of the valley. Nothing. The families left offerings at the site, food, clothing, handwritten prayers. They were all taken by morning. Witnesses swore that in the weeks after, they heard chanting at night. The same rhythm, the same echo. 5 for 1. 1 for 5. Only now, the voices were not fading. They were multiplying. Coincidence does not preserve patterns across centuries. Coincidence does not choose numbers like scripture, repeating them as though memory itself had a will. Coincidence does not accept offerings. The Miller brothers had been gone for over a century. And yet, in that valley, they were not gone. They were present, watching, waiting. By the late 20th century, the Miller curse was no longer just a whisper. It had become an artifact of obsession. Paranormal investigators set up equipment around the ruins of the mill, recording static that broke into patterns. The crackling, when slowed, revealed 5 distinct intervals of sound, pulsing in unison like footsteps. One investigator swore he heard names buried in the static, names no one had spoken in generations. Jacob, Elias, Matthew, Thomas, Caleb, the 5 brothers, each one called back from silence. But the equipment did more than record. It failed. Batteries drained within minutes. Tapes warped. Compasses spun wildly until needles bent. One man collapsed, claiming he saw the brothers circling him, their mouths open, though no sound emerged. His colleagues found him clutching his throat, as if silenced by unseen hands. He left the field entirely, never speaking of the event again. The deeper the investigators searched, the more they realized this was not a haunting. Hauntings fade. This was structured, ritualized. The ruins were not random stones, but an arrangement, a geometry older than the mill itself. A foundation meant not just for grinding wheat, but for grinding memory, binding it into cycles. Coincidence cannot drain batteries, warp tapes, and bend needles in patterns that mimic names. Coincidence does not build geometry that repeats in silence, waiting for recognition. What the investigators touched was not random. It was designed, and designs never die. You listening now are part of this design. The Miller curse was never confined to Virginia. Stories spread because stories are the true carriers of ritual. To hear is to inherit. To remember is to participate. And to speak it aloud is to bind yourself into the chain. That is why the valley remains restless. That is why patterns continue. There's a reason every record repeats the phrase, 5 for 1. 1 for 5 is not just a riddle. It is an exchange. The curse survives because it recruits listeners, each one bearing the weight of the number, each one repeating it, knowingly or unknowingly, passing the cycle forward. And now it reaches you. If you have followed this far, you're no longer outside the circle. You have heard their names, their chant, their pattern. The only way to seal it, to prevent it from spilling further into your own nights, is to mark your presence, to bind your place within the chain intentionally. Type these words twice in the comments below. 5 for 1. 1 for 5. Do not alter it. Do not break it. Do not add or subtract. Twice only. That is how you close the door, and how you prove to them you're not prey, but witness. Coincidence does not ask for ritual. Coincidence does not wait for you to type. But curses do. Even as the story spreads, there are those who insist it is all invention, coincidence layered into myth. And yet, every skeptic who writes about it too deeply seems to stumble. One historian who attempted to disprove the legend was found dead at his desk. 5 books open before him, each bookmarked at the page with the brothers' names. Another suffered a stroke mid-lecture, the last words on his lips recorded by students as 5 for 1. Silence follows those who try to unravel it too closely. This silence is not empty. It is filled with pressure, with watching, with the sense that the story is not being told, but telling itself through you. The Miller curse is not a ghost story. It is a design, endlessly unfolding. A wheel that keeps turning, grinding down each generation, marking them with a number 5. And those who resist become spokes in that wheel, dragged along whether they wish to or not. Coincidence cannot kill in rhythm. Coincidence cannot open 5 books at once. Coincidence cannot whisper its own pattern through dying lips. What you are hearing now is not invention. It is continuity. And continuity does not end. It circles. It waits. It feeds. There is a peculiar cruelty in history. Its tendency to repeat itself not as farce, but as echo. In 1982, a man building a cabin near the old mill began clearing the stones from the foundation. He hauled them into the woods, scattering them, determined to erase the last trace of the millers. But within weeks, the stones returned. He would find them stacked neatly outside his door at dawn, 5 at a time, wet with dew though the nights had been dry. He begged the sheriff to intervene. They laughed at him, called it pranksters. But who carries 5 stones through miles of forest without leaving footprints? Who arranges them so perfectly in silence? He left the valley after that, abandoning the half-built cabin. To this day, the ruins remain, the stones unmoved, as though anchored by something deeper than soil. Coincidence does not carry stones. Coincidence does not count to 5 at the door of a man who dared disturb a foundation. Coincidence does not stack memory into neat, silent warnings. The stones belonged to the millers, and the millers had not given permission. By the early 2000s, digital technology entered the valley. Curious teenagers brought cameras, eager to capture ghosts. They did not capture apparitions, they captured patterns. Photos taken inside the ruins distorted, always splitting into 5 vertical bands. Audio fractured into 5-second loops. One video showed a boy standing in the ruins when, frame by frame, 5 silhouettes appeared behind him, though no one else was present. When uploaded online, the files corrupted. Computers froze, hard drives crashed, memory wiped. But in every corrupted folder, one phrase remained, embedded in metadata, 1 for 5. No one could explain it. No one claimed to write it. But it was there, replicated across devices that had never touched the valley. Technology, indifferent and precise, does not invent curses. It records what exists. Coincidence cannot program metadata into dozens of hard drives scattered across the country. Coincidence cannot bend light into 5 shadows where only one boy stood. Coincidence does not stalk the digital world like a parasite. And yet the Miller brothers were there, etched into silicon, woven into code. The curse had adapted. The wheel had turned again. There is one account almost too chilling to repeat. In 2011, a woman driving through Virginia claimed she saw 5 men standing in the road at night. She slowed, honked, but they did not move. Their faces were pale, their clothes out of time, as though pulled from another century. She swerved, panicked, and when she looked back in the mirror, the road was empty. But she was not alone. Her dashcam recorded the encounter. The footage shows 5 figures illuminated by headlights, standing in formation. When she swerves, the figures vanish. But the footage continues, and for the remaining 10 minutes of the drive, the dashcam records a faint chant beneath the sound of the engine. Slowed and isolated, it is the same refrain, 5 for 1. 1 for 5. The woman never drove that road again. She moved states, sold her car, abandoned the recording. But it surfaced anyway, shared online, spreading the curse farther than it had ever reached before. Each viewer became part of the chain. Each listener carried the refrain in their memory. Coincidence does not walk roads in formation. Coincidence does not appear in headlights, vanish in mirrors, and linger in recordings. Coincidence does not chant. The Miller brothers had long been dead, and yet they were traveling. The curse was no longer bound to the valley. It was bound to those who witnessed it. History is supposed to be local, a story rooted in one valley, one mill, one family. But the Miller curse never obeyed the limits of geography. By the second decade of the 21st century, it had become migratory, hitching rides in the memories of those who listened. Families in other states began reporting dreams of 5 figures standing at the foot of their beds, silent, waiting. Some dismissed them as nightmares. Others could not, for when they awoke, they found traces of dirt on their bedroom floors, soil not native to their region, but consistent with the dark clay of that Virginia valley. There is a case in Kentucky. A father of 3 woke screaming in the night. His wife described him pointing to the window, insisting that 5 men were staring in. The children saw nothing. But in the morning, when they went outside, 5 footprints were pressed into the earth beneath the window. Bare feet, large, the impressions deep. Rain fell that night, but the prints did not wash away. They remained for 3 weeks, until the family fled the property. Coincidence does not walk barefoot across states. Coincidence does not carry soil into bedrooms. Coincidence does not leave footprints immune to weather. No, what traveled was not chance. It was hunger, old and unspent. The Millers had ceased to belong to Virginia. They had become a presence, waiting in the minds of anyone who dared remember their names. In California, a professor lecturing on folklore told the story of the Miller brothers to his students. He mocked it as backward superstition. But on the recording of his lecture, 5 knocks interrupt his words, each evenly spaced, louder than the microphone itself. He never heard them in the moment. Only the students listening later did. The knocks had rhythm, order, patience. Coincidence cannot knock in rhythm across states, across decades. Coincidence cannot choose soil, cannot ride sound. The pattern had no borders. The curse was never about one night. It was about expansion, multiplication. And those who heard the refrain became unwilling carriers. Patterns in myth often mask something older, something primal. 5 is not a random number. In ancient ritual systems, 5 represents the human form. The head, 2 arms, 2 legs. The pentagram, before it was ever feared, was a symbol of containment, of power. The Miller brothers embodied that number not by choice, but by fate. 5 sons, bound in blood, bound in labor, bound in silence. When they died together, the number did not dissolve. It ignited. Anthropologists studying the case proposed that the curse was in fact a cultural infection, a meme carried through generations. But even they admitted that memes do not appear in photographs where no figure stood. Memes do not leave voices on static. Memes do not drag investigators into unconscious collapse. No, what the anthropologists touched was something older than theory. They circled it but never entered it. Religious scholars pointed to the phrase 5 for 1, 1 for 5. They traced it back to Gnostic fragments where sacrifice is inverted, many dying to preserve one, or one dying to preserve many. It was a formula of substitution, a transaction meant to trick eternity. If the Millers died under such a formula, then their deaths were not final. They were exchanged. Their absence became presence. Their silence became echo, and still the refrain grows louder. In online forums, users claim to hear it while scrolling. 5 clicks repeating. In empty houses, pipes knock in 5s. In dreams, viewers of this very story report the same figures standing in formation, waiting just beyond the bed. Coincidence does not obey sacred geometry. Coincidence does not mimic Gnostic fragments. Coincidence does not echo through digital timelines. This is not folklore. It is liturgy unfolding, written not in parchment, but in pattern. There is one story, whispered among those who study forbidden histories, that reveals the most terrible possibility. The night the Miller brothers died, they were not victims of chance, nor of curse, but of ritual they themselves performed. Some claim the brothers were desperate, facing ruin, debt, or hunger. Then the final hours, they invoked an old formula. 5 as sacrifice, 5 as offering, 5 as wheel. Their lives fed into a covenant meant to sustain their bloodline. But something went wrong. Instead of preserving their legacy, it preserved them. Instead of blessing the family, it bound the valley. The brothers did not pass an arrest. They became fixed, trapped in the wheel they had turned with their own hands. And every time someone speaks their story, the wheel turns again. This would explain why the curse cannot be buried, why silence only feeds it, why remembrance carries it forward. They are not seeking release. They are seeking continuity. They're not pleading for prayers. They're demanding witnesses. And each witness, unwilling or not, becomes part of the covenant. Imagine this. 5 men standing at the moment of death, hands clasped, reciting the refrain. The night swallows them, but the words survive. Words are seeds. Seeds germinate. Seeds spread. And when enough remember, the brothers rise, not as flesh, but as presence, as repetition, as design. Coincidence does not turn men into symbols. Coincidence does not outlive centuries in silence and still demand memory. Coincidence does not spread like liturgy. What happened in 1821 was not the end of 5 lives. It was the beginning of something endless. And the wheel is still turning. Every curse hungers. It is not static. It consumes, it grows, it adapts. By the mid-2010s, the Miller pattern had seeped into places no one could ignore. Emergency call centers reported phantom calls from the valley, silent lines that repeated every night at the same hour, always lasting exactly 5 minutes before disconnecting. Technicians traced the calls back to non-existent numbers, codes long retired from the system. But the records were undeniable. 5 rings, 5 minutes, cut to silence. Hospitals began to whisper, too. Nurses spoke of patients murmuring the refrain under anesthesia. 5 for 1. 1 for 5. None of these patients knew the story. None had ever been to Virginia. Yet the chant surfaced from their lips as though carried in the bloodstream. One nurse resigned after a single night, swearing she saw 5 shadowy figures circling the operating table as a man lay unconscious. The doctors saw nothing, but the man never woke. Coincidence does not dial from dead numbers. Coincidence does not murmur ancient formulas in the throats of the unaware. Coincidence does not gather around operating tables, silent and watching. What was once local had become viral. The brothers were not bound to one town anymore. They were bound to the infrastructure of memory itself, spreading like a hidden infection. Patterns reveal themselves most clearly in crisis. In 2017, 5 men from 5 different cities vanished on the same night. Each had no connection to the others. Each disappearance occurred within the same 5-minute window, their last known movements caught on cameras. One man leaving a store, another stepping in his car, another walking his dog, another entering his apartment, another simply crossing a street. And in each video, for a single frame, 5 shadows appear around them, unnoticed in life, undeniable on film. The news did not connect the cases. Too far apart, too improbable. But investigators who compared the footage recognized the truth. The formation was the same. The rhythm was the same. 5 shadows circling one figure. 5 for 1. The bodies were never recovered. Families received no closure. But online communities pieced it together, noting the pattern, whispering of the Miller brothers. They understood now. The curse did not simply demand memory. It demanded renewal. The wheel turned by taking new spokes, new lives, binding them into the pattern of 5. Coincidence cannot erase men in unison across states. Coincidence cannot place shadows where no light exists. Coincidence cannot choreograph a ritual of disappearance across cameras that never should have intersected. The Millers had become hunters, not of land, but of time itself. And still the story spreads. This video, this very telling, is not immune. You are not separate. Every ear that listens is another witness drawn into the circle. Every repetition of the words carries the wheel forward. Perhaps you have already noticed small disturbances. 5 knocks when you are alone. 5 flashes of light in your peripheral vision. 5 moments lost from your memory without explanation. This is not error. This is inheritance. To know the Miller brothers is to be counted among their witnesses. And witnesses are never passive. They're drawn closer, step by step, until they too are arranged in the circle. Some claim the only escape is refusal, to never speak the names, never write the refrain, never share the story. But silence has never protected anyone. The widows were silent. The children fled. The town looked away. Still the curse followed, multiplying through absence. Silence does not save. It feeds. Coincidence does not stalk listeners in their own homes. Coincidence does not bend memory into patterns of 5. Coincidence does not travel across screens and linger in the dark when you close your eyes. No, what you're experiencing now is not chance. It is the wheel turning again, carried by your own witness. And once you're inside it, there is no outside. Every myth ends in revelation, but the Miller curse is no myth. It is revelation itself, unraveling slowly, taking centuries to bloom. By 2019, whispers emerged from researchers studying data anomalies. They noticed clusters of digital errors repeating in patterns of 5, emails arriving in sets of 5, corrupted files splitting into 5 fragments, server crashes occurring on the 5th minute of every hour. When cross-referenced, the locations of these errors drew a map. At the center of the map lay the ruins of the Miller Mill. Some believed it was coincidence, a mathematical quirk. But one analyst swore she heard voices through her headset when reviewing corrupted audio. Not distortion, voices. 5 men speaking in rhythm, their words just beyond comprehension. She unplugged her device, but the voices continued, faintly, through her own speakers long after power was cut. She resigned her post that very night, refusing to touch a machine again. Coincidence does not speak through dead circuits. Coincidence does not map itself back to one ruin across centuries. Coincidence does not survive the destruction of flesh and yet thrive in the skeleton of machines. This was not error. This was expansion. The curse had become systemic, threading through wires, pulsing through grids, binding itself into every structure humans built. To preserve memory, the most terrifying truth is not that the curse spread, it is that it adapted. Patterns of 5 began appearing in global tragedies. A train derailment left exactly 5 cars destroyed, though others should have followed. A building collapse spared every floor but 5. A plane vanished over the ocean with 5 empty seats on the passenger list. Empty not because they were unsold, but because 5 people had canceled at the last moment, their names never revealed. Reporters did not connect the number. Governments avoided speculation. But those who paid attention saw the rhythm. The brothers had become more than memory. They were inscription, writing themselves into disaster, as if reminding the world that every tragedy has spokes. Every wheel requires its circle. Coincidence cannot sculpt disasters with surgical precision. Coincidence cannot cancel tickets with invisible hands. Coincidence cannot prune catastrophe into symmetry. What emerged was not haunting, it was authorship. The Millers were no longer shadows bound to a valley. They were fingers pressed into history itself, guiding, correcting, reminding. And here is the revelation most refuse to face. The Miller brothers never ended. They are not ghosts. They are not curses. They are continuity. 5 human lives that learned, through ritual or accident, to escape the prison of death. But their escape was imperfect. They did not transcend. They recycled. They turned themselves into a wheel that demands motion, always motion, fed by memory, fed by repetition. Every story told, every chant spoken, every witness drawn closer is another turn of that wheel. And when the wheel turns enough times, what it carries does not remain in whispers. It manifests. It steps through. The brothers will not remain shadows forever. They are waiting for the circle to complete, for enough witnesses to join. You may tell yourself this is superstition, a chilling tale meant to unsettle. But ask yourself, why does the number keep appearing in your own life? 5 unread messages. 5 knocks on your door. 5 lights flickering above your head. Patterns you dismissed as meaningless. They were not meaningless. They were invitations. Coincidence does not invite. Coincidence does not write itself across continents and centuries, etched in a stone, soil, static, and circuitry. What you're hearing now is not just history. It is summons. And summons are never sent without purpose. Every wheel eventually demands its last rotation. In late 2022, 5 towns across 5 countries reported blackouts at the exact same moment, 5 minutes to midnight. Power grids failed, cameras cut, communication lines went dead. For those 5 minutes, the towns were isolated, sealed in silence. When the lights returned, residents claimed they had seen something. 5 figures, each standing in the center of their street, silent, unmoving, watching. Authorities dismissed it as panic during outage. But the testimonies were identical across continents. The figures did not walk. They did not breathe. They only stared, as though counting each witness before vanishing when the lights returned. Coincidence does not synchronize blackouts across nations. Coincidence does not summon identical apparitions. Coincidence does not stare through the darkness into the eyes of thousands and leave no trace. This was not panic. It was presentation. The brothers were no longer content with whispers. They were reminding us that their wheel had almost completed its turn. Some will ask, why now? Why after 2 centuries does the curse blaze so openly? The answer is terrifyingly simple. The brothers do not hunt randomly. They are gathering. They are completing the circle they began the night they all died. That will have spun through generations, across machines, through tragedies. And with every retelling, every witness, the circle tightens. Look at yourself. You are not apart from this story. You are within it. By listening, you have stepped onto the wheel. And once counted, you cannot be uncounted. You are part of the equation now. If the curse is hunger, you are sustenance. If the curse is rhythm, you are the beat. If the curse is the wheel, you are one of its spokes. Think carefully about what has already shifted around you. 5 lost minutes this week. 5 knocks you dismissed as the house settling. 5 shadows when there should have been 4. The wheel leaves fingerprints on its chosen before the final turn. Perhaps it has already left its mark on you. Coincidence cannot write your week into prophecy. Coincidence cannot stand at the edge of your perception and wait. Coincidence cannot bind your attention this long without reason. You are not here by mistake. You are meant to be here, listening, completing the circle. And now we arrive where all forbidden truths arrive, in silence after revelation. The Miller brothers were never a story of death. They were a story of continuation. They escaped the grave, but in doing so, chained themselves to eternity. And every chain demands more links. You are one of those links now. You may try to forget this. You may try to laugh, to dismiss, to click away. But the wheel does not break when you close your eyes. It turns. It waits. It counts. 5 for 1. 1 for 5. Always circling, always feeding. Until one night, when the lights flicker and you realize too late that you are no longer watching the story. The story is watching you. If you understand the danger, guard it, as you would a secret too dangerous for the unprepared. Subscribe only if you are willing to carry it further. Comment to seal what you have witnessed, and share only with those who you believe can bear the weight. For this knowledge is not entertainment. It is inheritance, and inheritances cannot be returned. You now know what countless have denied. The Miller brothers all died the same night, but they never stopped living that night. And as you pass this knowledge forward, the circle spins again. You have heard the wheel. You have felt its turn. And from this moment, you are inside it.